Hello and welcome to another episode of the Hockey News Cheat Sheet brought to you by Stix.com. That's Stix.com. I'm George Nassios and I'm joined by our co-host Andrew McInnis, and we have some very interesting future props for you to look at, and also our first show from what I thought was a pretty wild trade deadline, Andrew. So let's get into it. We're going to look at probably my favorite award, end of season award to look at if it's a race. Might be a bit of a race now. We're going to talk about Connor Hellebuyck now. He has surpassed Nathan MacKinnon to have the second best odds behind Leon Draisaitl to win the Hart Trophy. He's at plus 160. Leon Draisaitl's minus money, minus 170. The last goalie to win the Hart was Carey Price in 2015. Hellebuyck currently has a 37-9-3 record, 2.02 goals against, and 926 save percentage. He's leading in every goalie category. Should he be the front runner for this award?
He's doing everything he can to make his case for it. That's absolutely right. I mean, everything he's doing. Look, the start of the season that his team had was in large part due to their goal scoring. But we saw them revert back to who they are at their nature, and that's defense. You know, Tuesday night's victory for the Winnipeg Jets over the New York Rangers, that's about as Winnipeg Jets-esque of a win you can get, George. And that's about as Connor Hellebuyck making his case as you can get by winning these low-scoring games. It's a rarity in the NHL to win games 2-1 anymore, to win games 1-0 anymore. I mean, you just don't see it. Typically, teams have to score, at least reach the 3 or 4 goal mark. So he is certainly doing what he can. However, I've said this on the show for the past few weeks, and I've honestly been kind of waiting until I've been proven wrong about this and kind of hoping to be proven wrong a little bit. Are the Edmonton Oilers having a depth problem right now, George? Because I think they might be. And who knows if that's a fact? Everyone loves to blame the goaltending, but at the same time, the goal production has certainly dropped off. You know, McDavid since Four Nations, or even prior to that, after his suspension, hasn't looked the same. Draisaitl, you know, this guy needs to get a full-time masseuse for carrying the Oilers on his back. This guy is carrying the team. So for that reason, you know, I think it belongs to him. But at the end of the day, when you look at how this Winnipeg Jets team is winning a lot of their games right now, they are in low-scoring fashion. As the show, the co-host Habs fan, I do remember Carey Price winning that award. And I'll tell you what, this team, you know, I feel bad. Carey Price never had really offensive talent. He didn't. He literally never had a team with offensive talent. The difference is that Hellebuyck does have a team that's capable of scoring. So I think that the only time we'll really see a goalie win it is if like their offense is so brutal that they have to win every game the way that, like, pretty much if you were a Habs fan and you watched Carey Price give up fewer than 3 goals, you knew that you won that game. And for Hellebuyck, his team has a lot more goal production. So I don't think he's worth a sprinkle at this point, but it's really impressive to see what he's doing.
Yeah, I'm probably going to lean towards agreeing with you on that one. You know, Hellebuyck has a chance here, as crazy as it sounds in this day and age, where goalies don't play nearly as many games as they used to. He has a realistic chance of breaking the wins record set by Martin Brodeur and I believe Roberto Luongo. Maybe our producer Eric can check with us. I believe it's 47. So he has a realistic chance on that. He leads in every other category, and we didn't even mention goals saved above expected. So, but the thing is, like you said, he has a good team. He's not like Carey Price or Dominic Hasek when he was winning his Hearts, where they only really won because of their goalies. Like, Hellebuyck has a good team. And if we're talking about not looking necessarily just at the stats and the player most valuable to their team, I mean, I think there's a case made between Hellebuyck and Zach Werenski, who's at 81-1 odds, you take Zach Werenski off the Blue Jackets, forget it. Like, they're nowhere near a playoff spot. So in bringing up Hellebuyck and Werenski, and if you're going to take somebody, maybe you should think about Werenski at those odds. I just think the voters are going to pick Draisaitl. He's leading the Rocket Richard race by quite a few. Like, he's basically got that race locked up. He's second in scoring, which we'll get into in just a bit, in the Art Ross rate to Nathan MacKinnon. He's playing the best defensive hockey of his career. I think he's around the plus 25 on the season, which is much better than most of his teammates, including Connor McDavid. Really, realistically, there's only a quarter of the season left. Sorry, maybe realistically 20% of the season left. Leon Draisaitl is in the driver's seat for a reason. It would be kind of shocking to me at this point if he doesn't get the Hart Trophy. So I'm going to agree with you there. As good of a season as Connor Hellebuyck is having, I don't think it's worth the sprinkle. In fact, I'd say at minus 170, hit Leon Draisaitl in the Hart Trophy odds because I think he's a 85% favorite at this point to win that award. So
great call. And George, I got to tip my hat to you because you've been really hyping up Werenski, and really we've seen them fall up a little bit right now. And the thing is, when you're relying on your defensemen to make things happen for you on a nightly basis, obviously I watched that Habs and Canucks game. And when you're same thing for them, really with Quinn Hughes, like their power play looks useless out there. Those guys they look lost out there. It's a sad thing for a hockey team, though, to be this lost without an offensive defenseman, right? It really goes to show what those two guys bring to their team. And Werenski, he's expected to not only shut down top pairings every night, but to also bring the offense as well.
Yeah, I don't want to get into a tangent on the Blue Jackets here, but like he leads the team in points and they're in a playoff spot right now. I just don't, even if you talk about the Nords, I don't know how this guy really isn't the favorite as good as Cale Makar's been. The Blue Jackets have had a lot of injuries, not to mention what they had to deal with before the season. I mean, Werenski should be getting more love than he does, but I digress. It's the Blue Jackets. So we're going to move on to the Art Trophy race right now. And Nathan MacKinnon, minus 195 to win the Art Ross, became the first player to reach 100 points this season. The Avs comeback win over the Maple Leafs on Saturday. He still has a 5-point lead on Draisaitl, who's plus 125 to win the Hart. But with a more spread out offense in Colorado after their acquisitions at the trade deadline, could Draisaitl or even Nikita Kucherov take over the points lead?
Look, when I look at this, we don't want to just talk about favorites. I get that. But I think we overall want to discuss sometimes why a guy is a certain favorite, why somebody is sitting in certain spots, I guess. And I think that when you look at it, Nathan MacKinnon has become more of a playmaker. Like he always has been a playmaker. But, when people think about star players, George, they think about goal scoring, highlights, right? And one thing that I've been doing a lot more in the sports betting markets has been looking at some of these top-notch players and looking at them to get assists because you get a lot of value on that. And I think that same thing goes for a player like MacKinnon, is that there could be a night where he's quiet as far as his goal scoring goes. And, he passes the puck behind him to Nassios and he scores top shelf. He passes across the crease to Drouin and he puts the puck in. So it's interesting to see. There's nights where you think, oh man, MacKinnon had kind of a quiet night out there. Oh no, he was a +3 and he had 2 assists. So certain players like that can be just as good and effective by being playmakers as they potentially could be, if they're just, getting assists and not really scoring goals as much. So with that being said, I think that, there could be some value on Kucherov because it kind of seems like he's
got a 10-point lead though. I mean, it's 5 points on Draisaitl. It's 10 points on Kucherov with, less than 20 games left. You think that's realistic? I know the odds are better at plus 260, but there's a reason for that 10-point lead as opposed to
for
5
sure.
points.
I just think that as the Lightning go, Kucherov goes. That's the only reason why I say that. I wouldn't want to take the second place. I think MacKinnon wins it flat out. Like I hate coming on the show and just saying, okay, I'm going to take the first two favorites. Like give me Draisaitl, give me MacKinnon. But I think the reason why you look at these two different statistics, and I'm not saying Draisaitl isn't a good passer either, because he gets a ton of assists and he puts up a bunch of numbers. But if you notice right now, George, I mean, there's been so much fun following along with the whole Mikko Rantanen and stuff, and we could spend an hour talking about that together. But when it comes down to it, until the playoffs come, we're not going to know how much they miss Rantanen. Obviously, a big body for the playoffs. But Nate just looks like he's almost loving this. Like, oh, I don't have to play dump and chase hockey anymore. I get to actually play like free-flowing, carry the puck type of hockey. And it's like an all-star game watching those guys play. And when you've got Lehkonen and then Shushkin back in the lineup now and Drouin and all these guys. You add a guy like Charlie Coyle and Brock Nelson. I mean, this team is super deep. So maybe MacKinnon doesn't have to score the goals, but the assists are there.
Yeah, for me, if you're going to pick somebody, like I said, I think the gap's just too big with regards to Kucherov for him to make up those amount of points. I mean, barring a MacKinnon injury, I don't see him outscoring MacKinnon by more than 10 points for the rest of the season. Draisaitl's a guy I'd look at if you want to do that, because he has 2 games in hand on MacKinnon as well. So even though he's 5 points back, he averages almost a point and a half a game. So he's really only a couple points back if you do points per game. So that's the guy I'd look at in that area. And yeah, Colorado, what a wagon. I mean, crazy. Colorado and Dallas look like they're in a crash course for a first round playoff series. That's a Stanley Cup final. So how amazing is that going to be? But yeah, more depth on Colorado. I do agree with you. I think McKinnon's going to win the Art Ross, but I like MacKinnon. If you're going to pick somebody, we talked about the Hart. I like Draisaitl here better than I like anybody for the Hart to maybe usurp him in the Art Ross trade. We're going to move to the Stanley Cup odds right now. And after acquiring Seth Jones and Brad Marchand, Panthers acquire Brad Marchand. Okay. At the trade deadline, the Panthers are the slight favorites to win the Cup now at plus 500. Do you think they were the biggest winners at the deadline? And do they deserve to be the Stanley Cup favorites?
I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure if, well, okay, look, I think that they deserve to have this favorite label. I'm not so sure if they're my Cup favorite right now. And, you know, people get mad about the LTIR stuff, right? We've saw it with Tampa. We've seen it with Vegas. But let's not forget last year when Mark Stone pulled the Undertaker and just rose up out of his coffin on game 1 of the playoffs. How did they do in that playoffs? You know, did they go all the way? Because I still think that, yeah, picking up Brad Marchand is great. Picking up Seth Jones is great. But let's not forget how injured this team got in the playoffs last year. Tkachuk gets absolutely banged up. And I think the Tkachuk, and I could be wrong here, I think the Tkachuk situation is worse than just come out of nowhere and start game 1 of the playoffs. I could be wrong. He could be rehabbing. It could be that perfect time that everybody gets upset because he's magically better for first game of the playoffs. But I think injuries could hurt this team. I also think chemistry. There's a lot of new players, and they, of course, you know, when you add a fourth liner, because I always say that at the deadline, it's not as much about adding stars as it is about adding those missing puzzle pieces. You know, Nico Sturm and Anton Lindell, those guys, like the bottom 6 centers, are going to be really important. And when I look at Listerainen and Boquist, AJ Greer, Thomas Nosek, I don't really love that bottom 6, man. So if Brad Marchand's not healthy, if Tkachuk is only good for one hip or his leg, or what else is going on with this guy, I worry a little bit about them. I'll tell you a team right now that people are going to forget all about, and it's the Carolina Hurricanes. All right. I get it that they fumbled everything over the last little while. They fumbled everything.
That's putting it mildly.
Yeah. and that's putting it respectfully, I'd say. But you know what? Logan Stankoven is no slouch. But when you look at this team, they're going to get back to Carolina Hurricane hockey. And they do have depth. They do have a lot of pieces. They've been to the postseason for so many years. They know what it's like. And one thing we can certainly say about them, George, before I end my long-winded rant, is that they didn't add that many pieces at all. So sometimes people worry about a team adding too many. Like Colorado added a bunch of guys. They changed around their roster. I can't see it really hurting them. They pretty much stayed the same. And for Carolina, maybe it doesn't hurt them. Maybe it helps them. They're just the same team they were probably 20 days ago, minus the guy that didn't even want to be there.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, you mentioned Mark Stone, and last year Vegas didn't go to the Cup, but obviously there's a flip side to that coin. Nikita Kucherov, who missed the whole season a few years ago, and the Bolts won the Cup. So I think you're making your case for your arguments, but there's flip sides to a lot of those arguments. Even Colorado added about 4 players at the deadline a few years ago as well when they won the Cup. So it's going to be interesting to see. Quickly, though, if Florida isn't the favorite, who deserves to be the favorite?
Well, I think they deserve to be the favorite. They're just not the team.
They're not your choice. They're not your choice. Right. Who's your choice then? Let me ask you that.
I think it's Dallas.
Dallas. Fair enough. Fair enough. Speaking of Dallas, we're going to go into that topic for regular season. They're plus 210 to overtake the Jets who are minus 290 to win the Central Division. Obviously, the Jets with a pretty decent lead right now. But could the addition of Mikko Rantanen actually help propel the Stars to take over the division?
Well, I think that Winnipeg would have to do a lot to I keep using this word, but to fumble the division. You know, we just talked about Hellebuyck and potentially winning the MVP of the league. You know, he'd have to absolutely have a, disastrous remainder of the season. And this team defensively would have to crash and burn for really things to slip a lot. Looking at strength of schedule, I'm looking at it being relatively even here. But, this Dallas team, I think they're just built the right way. The fact they get Wyatt Johnston locked up for 8 years. Let's not forget, Sagan and Ben, those guys are sure they're on the kind of end of their careers right now. They're kind of walking, the past couple of years, the back nine. This team is super young. I mean, if you look around at some of the guys on this team, Rupe Hintz, Jason Robertson, Wyatt Johnston, and now you add Mikko Rantanen, not a big deal. Miro Heiskanen. I mean, a lot of guys that are pretty young. So the future is bright for this team. I think it's going to be a slow thing where they're gathering chemistry. But I don't think they're going to just walk through the rest of their games as the season moves forward. Is there value on it? I just don't think it's enough because Winnipeg's a team very similar to when they have a lead in a hockey game. I trust them to protect it. I trust them to protect this lead overall. I think what you want to do is if realistically you want to just take Dallas to win the East. That's what you want to do. Forget about taking them the West. Yes. You don't want to take about the win the division right now. If you like them so much, you think they have a shot to win the division, just go ahead and take them to win the West.
And I did do that before the trade deadline when they acquired Rantanen at plus 450. Those odds have shrunk incredibly since. So not that I had a vision that Rantanen was going to be on the Stars, but I do like that. One thing to keep in mind with that conversation about overtaking the Jets, they're 8 points back of them. But again, like I mentioned with Draisaitl and chasing McInnis, the Stars have 2 games in hand on the Jets. So they win 2 games. If they're even up, they're really just 4 points behind. Is there enough daylight with 16 games left? I'm not sure. I'd stick with the Jets as well. The Ottawa Senators, red hot right now, minus 430 to make the playoffs after the trade deadline. While they put themselves in a good position to make it, should their odds be this heavily favored?
It's funny because since a few weeks ago, we started talking a lot more about the wild card playoff race, looking at these odds. It was the New York Rangers and the Ottawa Senators. And I kind of mentioned it about, what these sports books are favoring. And I was a bit surprised before where the Ottawa Senators were they were sitting on the outside looking in. They weren't even locked into a playoff position at the moment. And they were the leaders as far as the odds on favorite to make the wild card spot, minus 210 or 220. They weren't even in that spot. They've had a lot of tough games recently, George. They've had some back-to-backs recently, and they've been able to overcome it. And we talk about, the making the right deadline moves. You got to think, man, Dylan Cozens is a hell of a pickup for that team. I mean, he's just, game-winning goal, even though it was into an empty net. You got to feel good about that one. The next night, he scores a big one as well. Seems like this team is going well. And I'll tell you, no matter what, if you think that, Allmark's gotten injured, this has happened, that's happened, they stole that game against Detroit a handful of days ago. And that's what you expect out of a goalie. And then the next time that they play and Allmark lets in 1 or 2 squeakers, the team will have his back and they'll score 3 or 4 goals. So, look, I'm not saying anyone should bet this at the minus 400 now. But I think it's the right price. The Ottawa Senators will make the playoffs. It's just a matter of if they finish as the top or bottom wild card seed. I think right now it's teams competing for that next one. And we're seeing Columbus go in the wrong direction right now. We're seeing Detroit, who hasn't won a game in March. The Rangers are fighting. The Bruins. I thought their management wanted them to get a good draft pick now, and all of a sudden they win their first 2 games after getting rid of all their players. So it's an interesting battle. But what do you think? Do you think the Ottawa Senators have it locked up, or do you got a hot take on them?
They have it pretty locked up. I'd be pretty shocked if they capitulate and don't make the playoffs right here. Obviously, minus 430 aren't great odds, but I'm 92% certain the Ottawa Senators are going to make the playoffs. A thing to add to that, I believe the World Juniors were in Ottawa this year, weren't they? if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
They play 8 of 9 games in April at home because they missed so much time at home in December and January when I believe the juniors were in Ottawa. So they have a ton of home games left. They've built a bit of a gap and a lead. I've always felt like this year it was their time to take that step. They have the lead. They have the home games. There's no reason. This would be a collapse of epic proportions at this point. If Ottawa doesn't make the playoffs, I think they're making it. So minus 430 odds, not the greatest odds, but it's for a reason. I definitely think if, I don't know what the ESPN percentages are for them to make the playoffs, but my percentages are like 92%, maybe 93 in honor of a great Leaf, Dougie Gilmour. But that's what I would put the Sens odds at of making the playoffs. So I think those odds are fair or should be even, longer. I mean, for them to like guarantee a playoff spot. So if you have the money, you want to bet the money to make some pretty guaranteed money, I think it's worth it. We're going to look at the same situation in the West, which is more of a fight. Calgary Flames are plus 180 and currently hold on to the second wild card spot in the West. They're just 1 point ahead of the Canucks and the Blues, who are both plus 480. Which team would you bet on at these current odds to sneak into that final wild card spot in the West and make the playoffs?
I think that the Canucks have value, George. I do, because you know what? They've played so horribly, and look where they are. Right, this team has not looked good. You just laid out the odds for me. You just told us what the number is, kind of where these teams are fitting in the puzzle. And I feel like the Flames have gotten away with Dustin Wolf stealing games for them. They've gotten away with winning low-scoring games. They've gotten away with some advantageous spots. The Vancouver Canucks have kind of just been hovering around, waiting to see Elias Pettersson score a goal, waiting to see their goaltending finally step up. If they can just hover around that spot, get on it, even just the most minuscule winning streak, I think they have what it takes for it to be worth it for us to take these. And let's not forget, like I said, the first couple segments, I'm giving out the chalk, giving out the favorite here. You're looking at these odds and you kind of want to say, you kind of want to zig when a team is zagging, right? You don't want to put in your future. Like I see it all the time in sports betting. People will see this team go on an 8-game winning streak and they're like, okay, now I'm going to bet on this team to win the cup. It's like, well, congratulations. You just bet them at the worst odds you possibly could. That's how I feel about the Canucks right now. I think you take a little flyer on this Canucks team that could catch fire. And I'll tell you what, media in Vancouver ripping the team apart right now. Reporters have been all over them. The coach is ripping apart his own team. They could leapfrog the Flames. We'll see. What do you think?
Yeah, you know what's interesting about this topic? Wednesday night, the Canucks and the Flames play at 9 p.m. If the Canucks win this game in regulation, these odds are going to change drastically.
Yeah.
Drastically. So that's the funny part of this conversation. It's I just think the Canucks, I don't know, they're so disjointed. I don't know when Quinn Hughes is coming back. He's such a difference maker on the PP. He's such a difference maker overall, especially on the PP for them. I just don't see, I can't bet on the Canucks based on what I've seen for them. But I agree with your points based on the odds that those are pretty long odds considering they're just a point back. So I wouldn't really, I don't know, even the Flames are plus odds, but it's worth really considering the Blues or the Canucks here at those odds. And like I said, if the Canucks win in regulation on Wednesday night, those odds are going to flip pretty quickly. I'm going to stick with the Flames at the plus odds. Out of those 3 teams, I would have said at the start of the year, the Flames have the worst team. I didn't think they'd be anywhere near a playoff spot at this point in the season. I think they're the best team, as a unit, playing as one out of these 3 remaining teams. So I will stick with the favorites. But like I said, at those odds, plus 480 for both the Canucks and the Blues, might be worth taking a flyer. We're going to move over to the fantasy corner now. Who will have a better finish to the fantasy hockey season after being traded? Josh Norris with Buffalo or Casey Mittelstadt with Boston?
It's interesting because, we did see Casey Mittelstadt have that nice assist to David Pastrnak last night. All of a sudden his role is elevated. His role gets kind of moved up much more than it was before. When you're playing on a team like the Avalanche, then you go to a team that just sold the farm all of a sudden you're walking into that locker room like, I'm actually kind of the man right now. Before I had McKinnon and this guy and that guy and that guy. You're looking around the room and you're relied upon a lot more. So when you're going to talk about a guy like that, then you're going to look over and say, how about a guy that got traded to the Buffalo Sabres? I'm sorry. I'm going to take the guy that's not on the Buffalo Sabres every day of the week that ends in Y. So no fantasy ads for me with a guy playing on the Sabres. Hey, look, their scoring hasn't been that bad. Their defense is worse, but I don't want anything to do with any Buffalo Sabre players.
Okay, strong on that one. Moving on to another comparison, which Ottawa Senators trade deadline acquisition will be more valuable for the rest of the year? Fabian Zetterlund or Dylan Cozens?
I think Zetterlund is going to be, how do I describe it? A good hockey fit for them. But as far as fantasy perspective, I'll take Dylan Cozens. I think Fabian Zetterlund, this guy seems like someone that's willing to crash the net. I don't know if you saw that viral video going around of him deadlifting, like it seemed like 400 pounds in the offseason. This guy is absolutely jacked. He's not scared of physicality at all. He's not scared of going in the corners. He's a good pickup for them. But as far as pure skill, pure finishing ability, being out there on the PP, the number one unit, I think Dylan Cozens is the answer. But playoffs and contributions to the team, maybe outside of scoring, Zetterlund's going to be great for that team, George. I really do believe it.
Yeah, I think two good pickups. But like you said, when it comes to fantasy points, definitely stick with Cozens on that one. Okay, sticking in the fantasy corner, who are your best ads for the week?
I got a couple different ones for this week. We're going to start with Mason McTavish. Looking at this guy, whenever you watch the Anaheim Ducks, you're impressed with what he's been able to do. The Ducks have been one of those young teams that have been kind of exciting to watch. Every now and then they put forward a game that you think, man, maybe their future actually is pretty bright. He's got a point a game in his last 18 games, 11 goals, and 18 points overall. Shout out to Eric, our producer, for those stats for me. Got to give credit when credit's due. So he's doing very well, and he's someone kind of flying under the radar. Something we haven't seen in many, many years. I don't know. I was going to say doping, but I don't think it was doping. A substance issue or whatever it might have been, supplement, whatever issue. Aaron Ekblad, right? He's gone for a little while. Seth Jones stepped in. We were already excited about the guy. We already talked about potentially adding him, but now he's on that PP1. His shots have been elevated. And I think the biggest ultimate reason for liking Seth Jones is that he's not going to be relied upon as defensively as he was before. He gets to be more of an offensive presence. His shot count has been high for sports bettors out there. The shots on goal prop has been hitting for him. He's doing very well. So I'll take a look at Seth Jones. Barrett Hayton, he's got a point in 4 of his last 5 for the Utah Hockey Club. His next 3 games are against the Ducks, Kraken, and Canucks. Barrett Hayton, you might not think he's a guy to add. He's someone worth it. And most people probably should have this guy, but you tell me if they already will or not. Logan Stankoven is going to have an elevated role on his new team, that's for sure.
Yeah, it looks like he might be on the first line over there. And when you mentioned McTavish, he's very available when it comes to fantasy leagues. Again, shout out to our producer, Eric, for the stack. He's currently only 20% rostered in fantasy leagues. So that would probably be, with McTavish, a good ad right now. Looking on the other side, who should people be looking to drop this week?
Well, it's kind of funny because I was talking up the Canucks, saying there's value to look at them and saying that, hey, maybe this team, could be a team that could, do something and surprise some people a little bit. But I'll tell you what, Brock Besser hasn't been good since JT Miller left. I mean, that was like his buddy. That was his partner. That was the guy that made plays with him and kind of, they drove the bus together. So I don't know if it's really a hot take or not, but he's somebody that I wouldn't really want sitting on my roster right now. Just at this point, there's too many other guys that are probably worth adding, like some of the guys that we just talked about. We talk about adding Dylan Cozens to the Senators. So I think Shane Pinto, if you have him sitting on your roster anywhere, I think he's worth dropping just because, the center depth, the power play time, the offensive zone time is going to go a lot more to a guy like that. And lastly, I'll say when you look at, certain teams that added, well, if you added, you probably have to subtract a little bit here. So when I look at a guy like Mikael Grenlund from the Dallas Stars. You know, when you add a guy like Mikko Rantanen, someone's got to lose out on some offensive time, and I think he could be one of those guys as well. I know Dallas spreads things out, but you know Mikko Rantanen is going to add a lot to that team, and so when you add somebody, someone else is being subtracted from that equation, so he might be that guy.
Yeah, 100%. The thing about Besser too, he's going into a contract. Like he's playing for a contract now, so it's kind of surprising that he's not producing at the rate he did last year. I'm sure he wished he could have flipped seasons from last year to this year, probably costing himself a few bucks here. Okay, this has been another episode of the Hockey News Cheat Sheet brought to you by Stix.com. That's STIX.com. For Andrew McInnis, I'm George Nassios, and we can't wait to see you again next time.